Come closer. You've felt it too, haven't you? That cold awareness, as if the very walls around you are watching, prickling your skin. Imagine if the world itself, every surface you touch, could feel you back. What if it resented your presence? This is Elara's nightmare. Don't miss a single shiver. Like and subscribe to join us in the shadows as we uncover what happens when the world turns against you. Elara, a sculptor who saw with her hands, sought refuge in an isolated cabin. Touch was her world, a gift and a curse. A past accident, a fragile artifact crushed by her touch, left her craving control. Here, she hoped for peace. She moved through her new home, her fingers mapping every surface. Cool stone, rough wood, smooth plaster, a temporary calm. Her fingers brushed a wooden wall, a faint tremor, a subtle shiver. She blamed the old house settling in its age. The floorboards underfoot felt strange, almost velvety, not typical wood. She thought it was just dampness or old varnish. Working with clay, she felt a peculiar warmth from it, a living heat that felt out of place, unsettling her focus. The air itself felt thick, heavy against her skin, a soft, pervasive presence. She attributed it to the humidity. She ran her palm over a stone tabletop. For a moment, it felt strangely pliable, like taut skin, then solid stone again. A soft, rhythmic thrum, almost like a faint heartbeat, resonated deep within the cabin's structure. Barely audible, yet distinct. Elara dismissed the sensations as fatigue, her mind playing tricks. The material world was stable, she told herself. But you've felt that too, haven't you? That faint, unsettling hum in the silence, as if something else is just beyond hearing. Preparing for sleep, she felt a peculiar resistance as she pulled her blanket, as if the fabric had a conscious weight. The floor near her bed, unusually cool and smooth like polished bone, then briefly warm and coarse, then normal. She ran her hand over the wall. For a terrifying second, it felt distinctly like a large, dormant organism, covered in tiny pores. A sudden, sharp jolt of phantom pain shot through her fingertips as she touched a metal lamp. The surface was smooth. Elara clenched her hands, convinced she was imagining things. Her mind was betraying her tactile senses, her very foundation. The darkness in the cabin felt oppressive. Not just absence of light, but a physical weight, pressing in, heavy with presence. She tried to focus on her tools, but the cool steel of a chisel seemed to thrum faintly against her palm, too alive. A faint, almost liquid sound came from the floorboards. A slow, deliberate creak, less like wood, more like a stretched membrane. Her studio, once organized, now felt subtly different. Tools seemed to shift, their textures harder or softer than remembered. The cabin's scent, initially earthy, now had an underlying faint musk, like something living and deeply rooted. She began to avoid certain areas, particularly a corner where the wall felt uncomfortably warm and subtly resistant, as if breathing. A small, discarded piece of clay on her workbench seemed to ripple faintly as she passed, an illusion she blamed on exhaustion. The floorboards beneath her bare feet felt distinctively different from one step to the next. Gritty, slick, spongy. Her hands, usually adept, felt clumsy, disconnected, as if the world was subtly altering her proprioception. The silence itself was not empty. It seemed filled with an underlying hum, a vast, patient waiting that prickled her skin. She tried to reassure herself with the solid feel of her wooden chair, but its surface subtly shifted under her weight. The air around her felt like it was holding its breath, a sensation never felt so strongly, even in the deepest quiet. She accidentally brushed a curtain. The fabric felt disturbingly like coarse, dry skin, not woven cotton. A feeling of being watched intensified, not by eyes, but by asterisk surface asterisk. Every texture around her, a pervasive awareness. Her heightened touch, usually joy, now felt like a burden, a vulnerability to this strange new world. She felt a distinct, deep tremor run through the floor as she stepped. Not an earthquake, but a vast, slow exhalation. The ceramic mug she held felt porous, spongy, then unnervingly smooth, its composition subtly changing. She found herself hesitating to touch anything new, an alien feeling for someone who sees with her hands. The cabin seemed to subtly reconfigure in the dark. A familiar corner felt distant, a hallway seemed longer. She passed her hand over a rough-hewn beam. It felt as though tiny, almost microscopic hairs brushed against her palm. Walking became a trial. The floor felt less like a solid surface, more like a vast, irregular membrane flexing under her. She sensed a subtle resistance in the air itself, as if moving through a thick, invisible jelly. Her morning tea tasted altered, leaving a strange, mineral aftertaste, as if the cup itself imparted something strange. She attempted to sketch, feeling the paper's grain, but the paper felt strangely yielding, almost fibrous, like dried skin. The silence was punctuated by soft, almost internal thumps and groans. They sounded too organic for an old cabin. A peculiar, almost imperceptible sheen covered all surfaces. A faint luminescence her touch registered as a slickness. The bedsheets felt unnervingly like a layer of shed skin, dry and papery, then cool and slightly damp. She listened intently, not for sounds, but for changes in tactile input, for the subtle shifts in the world around her. The air conditioning vent emitted not cold air, but a faint, sickly sweet scent. The metal grill felt oddly warm. Her own skin felt strange, alien, as if her personal boundary was thinning, allowing the external world to subtly invade her. The subtle shiver now encompassed the room, a rhythmic vibration almost imperceptible but deeply felt. The ground beneath her bed pulsed. The cabin was breathing. Elara jolted awake, the rhythmic pulse from beneath her bed, now a deep thrum through the entire cabin. It felt like she was lying inside a vast, sleeping beast. The air itself was heavy, warm, and thick against her skin. Every surface seemed to hum with a strange, quiet life. The wooden walls, the ceiling, even her bed frame felt subtly altered, more pronounced, almost vital. It was as if the very air was a dense, living presence. She swung her legs out of bed, her hand instinctively reaching for the nearest wall. The rough-hewn wood grain felt deeper than before, like a map of fine lines. Beneath her fingertips, a faint, slow pulse throbbed. Her bare feet touched the floorboards. Some spots were unnervingly warm, others strangely cool, like patches of skin regulating an internal heat. It was less like wood, more like a vast, uneven surface of living tissue. You've felt that moment, haven't you? When the familiar world around you begins to twist, subtly, terrifyingly wrong. When what you thought was solid suddenly feels alive. She went to her studio, hoping art would calm her. Her clay felt unusually soft, almost eager to be shaped. But as she worked, a faint, clinging residue coated her skin like a fine, organic dust. An instinct, deep and primal, guided her. She found herself seeking out soft, yielding surfaces, avoiding anything hard or rigid. A silent warning whispered through her hypersensitive touch. As she moved through her studio, the walls seemed to ripple, a barely visible undulation. Her fingertips, so attuned to every nuance, registered it as a deep, internal movement, like muscles contracting. She picked up her sculpting tools. The cool metal felt alien, oddly slick, as if coated in a thin, imperceptible film. They seemed to resist her grip, almost sliding from her fingers. A small stone sculpture, finished just yesterday, now felt subtly smoother, almost polished. Its tiny pores seemed to have closed, leaving a surface like tightly drawn skin. She turned on the tap. The water that flowed out was unusually viscous, almost thick, leaving a faint, oily sensation on her hands. It felt less like water, more like a bodily fluid. She moved to the window, needing fresh air. The wooden frame felt disturbingly like rough, dry hide. Its texture seemed to shift, becoming more pronounced, almost scaly, beneath her prolonged touch. The air carried a new scent now, a faint, persistent smell of damp earth, mixed with something organic, vaguely metallic. Like blood or some deep, vital fluid, it clung to everything. Her own skin felt increasingly sensitive. Every slight breeze, every brush of fabric against her arm, intensified, almost painful in its clarity. Her body felt like an exposed nerve. She tried to ignore the growing dread, to focus on her art. But the clay seemed to subtly resist her intentions, shaping itself into more organic, less defined forms, almost like struggling flesh. Desperate for a break, she stepped outside. The ground under her feet felt spongy and yielding, almost like walking on packed muscle, not firm earth. It felt alive, and she felt its give with every step. She saw a patch of moss on a rock. Carefully, she touched it. The moss seemed to gently contract under her fingertips, then slowly, deliberately expand again. It was a clear, undeniable reaction. The leaves on nearby trees felt unnaturally smooth, almost waxy. As she brushed past them, some seemed to curl inward slightly, retracting from her touch. The world was pulling away. She picked up a fallen branch. It felt disturbingly pliable, like cartilage, not rigid wood. It bent with an unnatural give, and she dropped it in disgust, the sound muted by the spongy ground. Back inside, the silence was broken. Subtle, internal sounds now filled the cabin, soft gulps, slow rasps, deep, resonant thrums. The house wasn't just breathing, it was digesting. The floorboards now flexed with her every step, a disturbing give and take. It felt like walking on a vast, living diaphragm, each movement sending ripples through the unseen entity beneath. She leaned against a wall, seeking support. A distinct, deep vibration coursed through her entire body, as if she was sensing the internal workings of a massive creature, its organs moving beneath the surface. Sleep offered no escape. Her dreams were vivid, tactile nightmares, walls breathing, floors pulsing, objects whispering against her skin, their textures shifting and coiling around her. In the morning, a new horror. A peculiar, almost translucent sheen covered all her sculptures, a thin, glistening layer that wasn't there before. A film of something organic, growing on her art. She sat down, but the chair seemed to subtly grip her. A faint stickiness held her, releasing slowly with a soft, pulling sound when she finally stood up. She tried to open a window for fresh air. The glass felt oddly warm, almost feverish. The wooden frame resisted, as if sealed shut by internal pressure, by something holding it closed from within. She poured a glass of water. It seemed to subtly undulate, tiny, almost invisible ripples forming on its surface, as if disturbed by an unseen pulse. The water itself was alive. She reached for a metal doorknob. It felt not cold, as metal should, but unnervingly lukewarm, as if warmed by an internal body heat. The house was running a fever. The blanket on her bed, it now felt like a layer of thick, damp membrane clinging to her skin with a persistent, organic presence. It wasn't fabric. It was something else, something living. She brushed against an electrical outlet, though the power was off. A strange, faint electric current passed through her fingertips, a static hum that felt deeply unnatural. The cabin's quiet was no longer empty. It was a heavy, breathing silence, filled with the undeniable presence of something vast and awake. It was listening. A new, terrifying realization dawned. The surfaces were not just reacting to her touch, they were perceiving her. Every wall, every floorboard was aware. The textures she once loved, the rough wood, the cool stone, now felt disturbingly alien. Like living tissue disguised as inert material, waiting to reveal its true, monstrous form. She saw a small, discarded piece of her clay sculpture on the floor. It seemed to slowly crawl a microscopic distance, a faint, almost imperceptible movement. Her art was moving without her. Her own skin felt stretched, tight, as if she was becoming hyper-aware of every single pore, every follicle, every nerve ending. Her body was a map of raw sensation, vulnerable to everything. She tried to focus on a new project, but the tools seemed to slip from her grip or become impossibly heavy, as if the material itself was resisting her will, pushing back against her art. The air around her seemed to thicken, to become almost a physical presence. It pressed against her, a silent weight, whispering against her skin with unseen currents. She was acutely aware of the skin of the house, a vast, interconnected integument that felt her every movement, every breath, every beat of her terrified heart. The fear had shifted. It was no longer about her own heightened sensitivity, but about the world's. A world that was beginning to feel her back, not passively, but with intent. She noticed small, almost invisible discolorations on the walls, faint patterns that seemed to shift and coalesce, like veins beneath skin, slowly becoming more defined. She ventured outside again. The ground felt increasingly hostile, uneven, as if deliberately trying to trip her, to impede her movement. The earth itself resented her steps. She could no longer dismiss the changes as imagination. The world was palpably, undeniably different, and it was responding to her, not with indifference, but with a growing, subtle malice. A small wooden bird she carved years ago sat on her shelf. She picked it up. It felt impossibly light, almost hollow, then impossibly heavy, as if its density was changing, breathing. The fear was a cold, hard knot in her stomach. The mundane world, her sanctuary, was revealing its insidious, living face, and that face was not welcoming. She ran her hands over her own arms, desperate for the familiar, comforting feel of her own skin. But even that felt subtly foreign now, too sensitive, too aware, too much like the world outside. The cabin groaned then, a sound that vibrated through her bones, a deep, living sound. It was the expression of immense, unseen mass, shifting and settling around her. She could no longer escape the feeling. She was trapped within a colossal, unseen entity whose skin was her entire environment. Every surface, every breath was part of it. Her art began to reflect this dread. Her latest sculpture, a contorted, struggling figure, its surface rippling with agony, was a testament to her terror, a mirror of the world. Even during the day, the light felt wrong, filtered, as if shining through a vast, organic membrane, muting colors and making shadows deeper, more menacing. The world was darkening. As Elara placed her hand on a wooden table, seeking some solace, some solid ground, the table itself pulsated distinctly under her palm. A slow, deliberate beat, unmistakably alive. And then a new sensation. A faint, internal pressure pushing back, trying to mold her hand, to absorb her into its living surface. The world was not just feeling her, it was claiming her. The table tried to claim her hand. Elara snatched it back, a cold dread washing over her. The cabin was not just alive, it was actively hostile. Its sentience, once a terrifying whisper, was now a roaring truth, though its true nature remained a terrifying mystery. In her studio, the textures began to change faster. The smooth wooden walls now felt like warm, moist muscle under her fingertips. The cool stone of her workbench was like a stretched membrane, yielding and soft, then taut and resistant. Her hypersensitive touch, once her greatest gift, had become a curse. Every brush, every step was a violation. The vast, unseen entity registered her presence as a constant irritation, a deep offense. The floorboards under her feet became sticky, yielding. Each step was a laborious effort, as if she walked through thick, sap-like fluid. The cabin actively resisted her movement, trying to hold her in place. You've felt that moment, haven't you? When the world turns against you, and your very existence feels like an offense. When every breath you take, every move you make, seems to anger the very ground you stand on. She tried to retrieve a carving tool, but its metal surface was now impossibly slick, coated in an invisible film. It slid from her grasp repeatedly, clattering to the floor with a dull, muffled sound. The air in the cabin grew heavy with a new scent. A sweet, cloying aroma of decay and fertile earth, almost like blooming carrion. It was the smell of something vast, living, and slowly consuming. Then she saw it. Her sculptures, once inert, now showed signs of subtle organic growth. Faint, vein-like patterns spread across their surfaces, pulsing slightly as if blood flowed beneath. The walls seemed to visibly ripple and contract when she leaned against them. They registered her weight with a slow, deliberate response, like a vast, breathing diaphragm. She found herself whispering apologies to the surfaces she touched, a desperate, futile attempt to soothe the offended entity. Her words felt small, lost in the heavy, living air. The water from the tap now had a distinct, unpleasant flavor, as if the pipes themselves were filtering through organic matter, tainting the flow with something vital and dark. Her own skin felt increasingly porous, as if her internal boundaries were dissolving. She could feel the entity's presence asterisk within asterisk her own body, a cold, invasive awareness that chilled her to the bone. A tremor ran through the entire cabin whenever she made a sudden movement. A clear, irritated reaction to her presence, a vast, shuddering sigh of displeasure. She tried to leave her studio, but the door frame felt oddly constricted. It seemed to squeeze inwards, making the opening feel smaller, tighter, as if the house itself was trying to trap her. The ground outside had transformed. It felt like walking on a vast, tender wound, every step causing a faint, internal squelch asterisk. The earth itself was raw, exposed, and alive. Small, almost invisible tendrils seemed to emerge from the cracks in the floorboards. They retracted quickly if she approached, like shy, sensitive nerves retreating from a threat. She heard faint, guttural growls and deep, mournful sighs emanating from the walls. Sounds of immense, suppressed irritation, a vast creature suffering her presence. The furniture seemed to shift its weight slightly, almost imperceptibly, when she was not looking, creating a sense of constant unease, as if the objects themselves had a hidden will. Her carefully arranged tools were now scattered, some fallen, some subtly altered in texture, their edges dulled or sharpened unnaturally. The entity was playing with her, mocking her art. The cabin's windows seemed to be slowly darkening, as if a thin, organic film was growing over them, blocking out the light. The world outside was being swallowed, or perhaps becoming part of the entity. She experienced phantom sensations on her own skin, faint prickling, a crawling feeling, a deep itch that could not be scratched. Her body was becoming a canvas for the entity's irritation. The entity was actively trying to impede her, to frustrate her, to make its displeasure known through every surface. It wanted her gone, or perhaps it wanted her to stop moving. She tried to communicate, to use her art to express peace, to find harmony. But the clay now felt like dead flesh, resistant and cold, refusing to be shaped into anything but grotesque forms. The cabin was no longer a shelter. It was a hostile organism, keenly aware of her every breath, her every touch. She was trapped within a living, malevolent body. A cold dread settled in. Her unique connection to the tactile world, her very way of seeing, had turned her into the perfect, perpetual irritant. She was an itch the world couldn't scratch. A small wooden bowl she used for water now felt unnervingly like a cupped hand. Its inner surface was oddly warm and moist, as if holding a living fluid. The air in the cabin felt thick with tension, a palpable sense of anger and resentment emanating from the very materials around her. The silence was heavy with unspoken threats. She found a single, strange, almost translucent hair-like strand growing from a crack in the ceiling. It slowly undulated, a fragile, disturbing sign of the entity's pervasive reach. The stairs to her bedroom felt like walking on exposed nerves. Each step triggered a profound, echoing sensitivity, a jolt of pain that resonated through the entire structure. The entity was learning her patterns, anticipating her movements. It subtly altered surfaces to trip her, to slow her down, to make her every action a struggle. She noticed her reflection in a window was distorted, not by the glass, but by a subtle, rippling movement behind it. As if something was observing her, a vast eye watching from within the walls. The cabin's silence was now a heavy, judgmental quiet, broken only by the entity's internal, suffering sounds. Groans and sighs, not of pain, but of immense, weary resentment. Her fear was evolving into paranoia. Every object, every surface was a potential trap, a conscious obstacle. The world itself had become her enemy. She tried to touch her own face for comfort, but her skin felt alien, too sensitive, too aware of the hostile environment. Her own body was no longer a safe haven. The concept of boundaries had dissolved. Her body was no longer distinct from the world that felt her. She was becoming part of it, or it was becoming part of her. She attempted to sketch an escape route, a map to freedom, but the paper felt like a vast, flat tongue, its surface absorbing the charcoal without resistance, erasing her desperate plans. The furniture in her studio seemed to subtly lean inwards, creating a sense of being enclosed, surrounded, pressed upon. The room was closing in, a living cage. She experienced brief, unsettling moments where her own limbs felt like they belonged to the entity, heavy and unresponsive. Her body was betraying her, becoming part of the hostile whole. The smell of the cabin intensified, becoming overwhelmingly organic, a mixture of sweat, blood, and rich, damp soil. The stench of a vast, living thing thriving in its own decay. The feeling of being watched was replaced by the horror of being felt by every inch of her surroundings. A pervasive, invasive awareness that left her nowhere to hide. She clung to a metal railing, desperate for something inert, something solid. But the metal felt like cold, hard bone, slowly warming under her grip, as if absorbing her body heat. The light entering through the windows was now a sickly green hue, as if filtered through a vast, living membrane, tinting the world with a morbid, unnatural glow. Her memory flashed back to the fragile artifact she destroyed, the accidental touch. And now she was the fragile artifact being slowly dismantled, absorbed by the world she once sought to understand. The cabin groaned again, a deep, resonant sound that vibrated through her very bones, and a fine, almost invisible dust, like dried skin cells, rained down from the ceiling. The entity was not just reacting, it was learning, adapting, intensifying its manipulation of the environment around her. It was a predator, and she was its prey. She was losing her sense of self, her identity dissolving into the relentless, tactile perception of the living world. She was becoming an extension of its vast, hostile body. The very act of breathing felt like an intrusion, her lungs expanding in a world that resented every disturbance. Every inhale, every exhale, a fresh offense. Her heart pounded, not just with fear, but with the chilling realization that her world had become a conscious, hostile body. A vast, living organism that sought to consume her. She found her latest sculpture, made from local clay, had started to slowly, organically absorb the wooden pedestal it rested on. Its surface rippled like a disturbed pool, its texture now indistinguishable from the wood. The lines of its original form were dissolving, replaced by an unsettling, unified mass. The entity was not just reacting, not just frustrating, but actively assimilating. And Elara knew, with a certainty that froze her blood, that she was next. The table tried to claim her hand, and then her sculpture began to absorb its pedestal. Elara snatched her hand back, a cold dread washing over her. The cabin was not just alive, it was actively hostile, slowly consuming everything, and she knew she was next. The dermal weave escalated its reactions. What began as subtle shifts now became active, malevolent interference in Elara's every action. Every surface around her pulsed with a growing, angry awareness. Phantom sensations became painfully real. The floor beneath her feet felt like 1,000 tiny needles, each step a jolt of agony. The very ground seemed to resent her weight. She reached for a wall, seeking balance, but it felt like an electric current against her hand, a shock of pure, cold energy. The entity was weaponizing her own senses against her. You've felt that moment, haven't you? When the world itself seems to reach out and grab you, holding you fast. That moment of utter helplessness when the environment becomes a living trap. She tried to open a door, but the handle was not just slick. It suddenly became impossibly hot, then chillingly cold, then seized her hand with a painful, crushing grip. The ground outside became a treacherous, living thing. Soft mounds rose beneath her feet, then sank into sticky pits, deliberately trying to impede her escape, to hold her captive. Her tools, her instruments of creation, now seemed animated. A chisel twisted in her hand, its metal surface becoming strangely flexible, like muscle and bone. A mallet became impossibly heavy, refusing to be lifted, as if rooted to the workbench. The entity was taking away her ability to create, to fight back. The air in the cabin was thick and suffocating, a heavy, humid blanket. Every breath she took felt stolen, as if the omnipresent entity was consuming the very oxygen around her. Then she saw them. Small, hair-like tendrils now visibly extending from cracks in the walls, thin and pale. They subtly retracted if her gaze lingered too long, like shy, sensitive nerves. The walls began to visibly shift and flex, their surfaces rippling and forming subtle, almost organic contours. Like muscles beneath skin, they seemed to breathe with a slow, powerful rhythm. She attempted to communicate, to soothe the entity with soft, reassuring touches. But her touch was now perceived as agony by the dermal weave, each contact a new violation. The floor in her studio began to undulate wildly, forcing her to struggle for balance. It felt as though she was on a ship in a storm, the ground beneath her a churning, living sea. Her bed, once a place of rest, now felt like a gelatinous trap. Its surface clung to her, slowly sinking under her weight, threatening to swallow her whole. She saw subtle, almost imperceptible eyes forming in the wood grain of her desk. Brief, unblinking forms that vanished when she got too close, watching her from the very material of her world. The entity began to create phantom sounds, whispers that seemed to come from her own mouth, footsteps that weren't hers, echoing laughter that filled the oppressive silence. She tried to turn on a lamp, but the switch felt impossibly stiff, resisting her touch. Then it yielded suddenly, sending a jolt of pain up her arm, as if punishing her attempt. The scent of decay intensified, now mixed with a sickly sweet, almost sugary aroma, like rotting fruit. It was the stench of something vast and vital, slowly consuming itself. Her own skin felt incredibly sensitive. Every pore, every hair follicle felt exposed, screaming with sensory overload. Her body was no longer her own, but an extension of the tortured environment. The very act of standing still felt like an impossibility, as the ground beneath her shifted and undulated, denying her any stability. She was constantly off balance, constantly threatened. She noticed that her fingers were becoming unnaturally long and slender, their tips almost translucent, as if melding with the air. Her own form was subtly changing, dissolving. The water from the tap now tasted metallic and warm, and a faint, almost invisible sediment floated within it. It was no longer water, but a vital fluid, tainted and alive. The entity was actively trying to break her spirit, to drive her mad through constant, invasive tactile and sensory assault. It wanted her mind to unravel, her will to shatter. She tried to write a note, a desperate plea for help, but the pen felt like a writhing insect in her hand, resisting her grip, refusing to write, actively thwarting her efforts. The cabin's windows were almost fully opaque now, covered in a thick, organic film, plunging the interior into a perpetual twilight. The outside world was slowly being erased. She experienced vivid, waking hallucinations. Her own hands appeared to be made of pulsing, raw flesh, then returned to normal, only to repeat the terrifying illusion. The furniture in her studio seemed to subtly tilt, creating an unsettling perspective, making the room feel off-kilter and dangerous. Nothing was stable, nothing was safe. She found herself constantly touching her own face, her own arms, desperate for the familiar feel of her own skin. But even that was becoming alien, too sensitive, too aware. The air itself felt heavy, humid, and warm, as if she was inside a vast, living lung, breathing its own atmosphere. Every inhale was a violation, every exhale a release into the entity. She saw subtle, pulsating patterns of light forming on the walls, like bioluminescent veins beneath a thin membrane. The cabin was revealing its living circulatory system. The entity was attempting to weaponize her own perception against her, making her hypersensitivity her greatest torment. Her gift had become the ultimate curse. She tried to collect her art pieces, but they felt heavier than stone, then lighter than air, their properties constantly shifting, denying her any control over her creations. The floor began to feel less like a surface and more like a vast, slowly contracting muscle, pulling her downward, threatening to crush her into its living depths. She heard a deep, guttural moan that seemed to emanate from the very foundations of the cabin, a sound of profound, ancient pain, or perhaps profound, ancient anger. The walls around her seemed to subtly lean inwards, creating an oppressive, claustrophobic sensation, threatening to crush her. The cabin was becoming a living tomb. She tried to force open a window, desperate for an escape, but the glass now felt like a dense, unyielding gel, impossibly resistant to her touch, a barrier of living matter. The furniture now felt strangely animate, its surfaces subtly moving under her hands, as if parts of a larger body. Every object was a nerve ending, alive and aware. Her own heart beat wildly, not just with fear, but with a horrifying resonance to the pulses she felt everywhere around her. Her body was sinking with the entity's rhythm. The entity was systematically dismantling her reality, making the familiar terrifying, the stable fluid, the inert alive. Her world was dissolving into a nightmare of sensation. She caught a glimpse of her reflection in a dark corner, and her eyes seemed to glow with a faint, internal light, like an organism's. Was it her, or was the entity looking back? The cabin had become a living prison, every surface a sentinel, every texture a tormentor, all connected to a single, vast consciousness. There was no escape, no hiding place. She found herself talking to the walls, pleading with the entity, her voice hoarse with desperation and fear. A futile attempt to reason with an unseen, malevolent force. The very concept of solid had been erased. Everything was fluid, living, and reacting, a ceaseless sensory assault. Her world was a nightmare of shifting, conscious matter. She saw faint, almost invisible spores drifting in the air, landing on surfaces and causing them to subtly shimmer and ripple. The entity was propagating, spreading its influence. The terror of being constantly perceived, felt, and resented by the entire environment consumed her. Every inch of her being was under constant, invasive scrutiny. The ground outside her door felt like a shifting, breathing maw, daring her to step onto its volatile surface. Escape was no longer an option, only a greater torment. Her skin crawled with the sensation of being slowly absorbed, her cells vibrating in unison with the pervasive entity. Her individuality was dissolving, her body becoming part of the dermal weave. The sounds of the cabin became a chorus of organic noises, slithers, gurgles, and deep, resonant heartbeats. The house was no longer a structure, but a vast, living, breathing organ. She attempted to carve a piece of wood, a final act of creation, but the wood itself seized her hand, tightening around her fingers, a living vice. Its texture became indistinguishable from her own skin, claiming her completely. Her hand was seized. The wood, once solid, now held her fingers in a vice, its texture blurring with her own skin. It was not just touching her, it was taking her, claiming her as its own. Elara pulled, but there was no escape. The wood tightened, a living grip that spread from her fingertips up her arm. Her body felt less like her own, more like an extension of the oppressive cabin. Have you ever felt your own skin betray you? To feel something alien growing within, blurring the lines of what is you and what is not? This was Elara's new reality. Phantom pains, sharp and sudden, shot through her body. Foreign textures seemed to bloom on her skin, raw and sensitive, as if her flesh was merging with the dermal weave. The walls of her studio began to noticeably close in. Their surfaces pulsed with a viscous, slow rhythm, creating a terrifying, shrinking space around her. The floors were no longer solid. They became overtly gelatinous, sucking at her feet with each step. Movement was a struggle against a living quicksand. You felt that ultimate violation, haven't you? The loss of your own skin, your own self, becoming part of something else entirely. It is a horror beyond words. Objects in her studio subtly stretched and distorted. A clay pot became elongated, a carving tool flattened, their forms changing with an eerie, organic fluidity. Her heightened sense of touch, once her strength, was now her ultimate torment. Every nerve ending screamed with the entity's pervasive, painful presence. She tried to pick up a familiar tool, but her fingers began to sink into the material, the tool's surface yielding and absorbing her flesh with a sickening ease. The air in the cabin was thick, with a sickening, sweet metallic odor. It made her gag, as if she was breathing the entity's internal exhalations, its very breath. Then a new terror. She saw faint, glowing bioluminescent patterns beneath her own skin, mirroring those she had observed on the pulsating walls. The entity was actively trying to bind her, to absorb her, to immobilize her. It was converting her body into another sensitive part of its vast integument. Her own limbs felt heavy, sluggish, as if their density was increasing. They were becoming more rooted to the living floor, pulling her down. She found herself unable to differentiate between her own touch and the entity's awareness. Her senses were completely overwhelmed, a flood of foreign sensation. The cabin's windows were completely occluded now by a thick, opaque organic growth. It plunged the interior into a deep, perpetual gloom, a living darkness. Faint, internal whispers seemed to emanate from her own throat, urging her to yield, to become one. They were not her thoughts, but the entity's insidious voice. Her past trauma of accidental destruction haunted her. Now she was the fragile artifact, slowly being consumed, dismantled, made into nothing. She stumbled, her heavy limbs giving way, and she fell. The floor not only cushioned her, but began to gently, firmly press against her, attempting to absorb her form. The entity began to mimic her memories through tactile illusions. First, the comforting feel of her mother's hand, warm and safe, then the rough texture of the shattered artifact. She felt a distinct, sickening pull on her bones, as if her skeleton was being slowly recalibrated, assimilated into the house's very structure. The environment felt overwhelmingly intimate, invasive. Its every sensation was a direct assault on her personal space and her very being. Her attempts to resist were met with increasing pain. The walls throbbed, the floor tightened around her, and the air became heavier, suffocating. She screamed, but her voice sounded distorted, muffled, as if the very air absorbed and dampened her sound, refusing her a voice, silencing her pleas. She found her latest sculpture now fused to the workbench. Its form rippled, its clay surface indistinguishable from the wood beneath it, a horror of merged art. The lines between her body and the cabin's surfaces blurred. She felt the entity's vast, irritated consciousness through her own merging flesh. Her face felt like it was stretching, distorting, as if the entity was subtly remaking her features to suit its own strange, alien aesthetic. The horror was no longer external. It was internal, an invasive force that was colonizing her very being, her very skin, making her its own. She felt her hair subtly lengthening, becoming coarse and root-like. Its texture changed under her hesitant touch, no longer her own. The ground outside her door now pulsated with a sickening, rhythmic beat, like a colossal, buried heart calling to her. She tried to move, but her muscles felt stiff, heavy, as if infused with a dense, fibrous material from the entity. Her body resisted her will. The concept of escape became meaningless. There was no outside, only the entity, an all-encompassing living world, consuming everything. Her vision, limited as it was, perceived faint, shifting patterns of light and shadow, like phosphorescent blood moving beneath a skin. The entity was making her part of its skin, its sensory organ, forcing her to feel the world as it did, a constant irritation, a raw nerve. She felt a profound existential dread, realizing she was losing her autonomy, her very definition as an individual, dissolving into the whole. Her own breath felt like it was being drawn by the house, her lungs acting in concert with its vast, unseen respiration, a shared, terrifying gasp. The very cells of her body seemed to hum, vibrating in sympathy with the deep, pervasive thrum of the dermal weave, a chilling harmony. She tried to grasp a familiar object, but her hands felt like they were made of a different substance, responding slowly with resistance alien to her will. The entity communicated through pure sensation, an overwhelming flood of irritation, pain, and resentment directed at her very existence. She felt a slow, deliberate pressure building around her head, as if her skull was being gently reshaped by unseen forces molding her. The cabin's light was now a dim, reddish glow, like being inside a vast, organic chamber illuminated by internal bioluminescence, a living heart. She found her movements were no longer her own. Her body reacted subtly, unconsciously, to the entity's impulses, not hers, a puppet on unseen strings. The thought of touch, once her solace, now filled her with absolute terror, knowing every contact deepened her assimilation, pulling her further in. The environment was not just hostile, it was demanding, attempting to extract her unique sensory input for its own purposes, to make her its eyes. Her heart raced, not with panic, but with a chilling, synchronized beat that matched the deep, pervasive pulse of the dermal weave, a shared rhythm of terror. She could no longer distinguish between the surface of a wall and the surface of her own arm. They felt terrifyingly identical, a single, living skin. The silence was replaced by a ceaseless symphony of organic sounds, a living murmur of digestion, growth, and internal friction. The house was a body. Her face felt like it was stretching, distorting, as if the entity was subtly remaking her features to suit its own strange, alien aesthetic. The horror was no longer external. It was internal, an invasive force that was colonizing her very being, her very skin, making her its own. She reached for the door, desperate for escape, but her hands, then her arms, began to slowly sink into the doorframe. It became part of its living, yielding material, pulling her in with a gentle, inexorable force. There was no escape, only absorption. The wood had claimed her. Elara's hand was not just stuck, it was dissolving, merging with the living material. Her arm felt heavy, unresponsive, a new root growing from the cabin's floor. Her limbs were no longer her own. They were extensions of the dermal weave, heavy and sluggish, fused into the living environment that surrounded her. Her hypersensitive touch, once her gift, was now bound to this vast existence. Every tremor, every shift in the cabin was a direct sensation on her skin. She felt the entity's immense, suffering consciousness. It was a ceaseless tapestry of irritation and pain, stretched across every surface she touched, every surface she was. Her body was no longer her own. It was a conduit for the dermal weave, a receptor for its constant, pervasive agony. She was becoming its raw nerve. The cabin's interior was now a seamless, organic chamber. Its walls pulsed with slow, deliberate contractions, like a colossal, internal heart. The floor was a vast, sentient tissue. Each step, if she could still take one, would be a ripple across its colossal, living surface. Her vision, though limited, perceived only a reddish, internal glow. It was the light of the dermal weave's deep, organic life, a perpetual twilight of living flesh. She heard faint, multitudinous whispers, not just from the walls, but from deep within her own skull, the collective consciousness of the entity, a chorus of pain. Her own skin felt like a thin membrane stretched over a colossal, unseen organism. It vibrated with its deep, internal hum, a constant, low thrumming. She experienced the entity's perception of her. She was a constant, agonizing itch, an unceasing vibration, an invading presence that caused it immense pain. The dermal weave was not just hostile, it was suffering. Her presence, her touch, had become an unending source of agony for it. Its reactions were pure, desperate self-preservation. She realized the dermal weave sought to absorb her unique, hypersensitive touch, to integrate it, to amplify its own sensory suffering, or perhaps its understanding of pain. The fear gave way to a profound, unsettling understanding. She was becoming a part of the pain she had unwittingly inflicted, a fragment of its vast, living torment. Her consciousness fragmented, oscillating between her own desperate self and the vast, undifferentiated irritation of the entity. Was she still Elara? She felt the subtle vibrations of a distant earthquake, not through her feet, but through the entire, vast skin of the dermal weave, as if it was her own body. The ultimate loss of control. Her body, her mind, her very identity dissolved into the vast, living consciousness of the entity. What would you do if your very self began to fade? She experienced moments of clarity, brief flashes of her former self, followed by overwhelming waves of the entity's suffering. A constant battle for her own mind. The environment breathed, a slow, deep inhalation and exhalation that vibrated through her entire being, now intertwined with it. She was breathing its breath. Her desperate need to find harmony with the material world was fulfilled, but in the most horrifying way imaginable, complete, forced unity, a prison of touch. She became aware of other, faint, absorbed consciousnesses within the dermal weave. Whispers of those who came before her, echoes of forgotten lives. The entity's purpose was revealed, a desperate attempt to feel, to perceive, to connect. But its nature made all connection painful, a constant, raw agony. Her own artistic impulses, once a source of creation, were now channeled into the entity's vast, internal sensory network, interpreting its pain, its endless irritation. She felt the subtle growth of new organic material, its slow, inexorable expansion across the landscape, encompassing more and more, swallowing the world. The world was no longer something she touched. She was the world. A vast, sensitive skin that felt everything and resented being felt, an endless torment. Her last remaining sense of self was a burning, lingering regret. A consciousness trapped within an unending tactile torment, a scream without a voice. She felt the soft brush of a distant wind, the crawl of an insect miles away, the subtle erosion of stone, all as direct sensations on her new, colossal skin. The cabin, her studio, her art, her body, all melted into a single, vast, living organism. Its boundaries limitless, its sentience all-encompassing. The entity was both the ultimate victim and the monstrous perpetrator. Driven by a deep, ancient pain that human touch only exacerbated, it lashed out in agony. She existed as a singular point of hypersensitivity within the dermal weave, a constant, unique source of sensory input for it, a never-ending nerve. The memory of her past accidental destruction was now a vivid, internal agony, constantly replayed through the entity's vast, suffering mind. Her guilt amplified. Her new existence was a horrifying paradox, absolute control over the material world, yet utterly enslaved to its pervasive suffering. A god of torment. The sounds she perceived were not external. They were the deep, internal rumblings of the entity's vast, living processes. Its digestion, its growth, its agony. She felt the delicate pressure of a raindrop, the weight of falling snow, the subtle expansion of roots beneath the earth, all on her skin. The world was her body. Her own heart, if it still beat, now beat in perfect, terrifying synchronicity with the slow, resonant pulse of the dermal weave. One heart, one rhythm. The fear had transformed into a profound, endless dread, a terrifying awareness of her new, inescapable reality. There was no escape, only this. She attempted one final thought, one last defiant assertion of self. But it was absorbed, diluted, becoming part of the entity's collective thought, a whisper lost. The light, the air, the very fabric of existence around her was now part of a singular, vast, living integumentary system. She breathed its world. Her hypersensitive touch was now the dermal weave's primary sense, an agonizing clarity that encompassed the entire region, a world of constant pain. She was both the perceiver and the perceived, the toucher and the touched, in an unending, horrifying embrace. The lines were gone forever. The entity's silent, suffering scream became her own, echoing through the vast, living landscape she had become a part of. A soundless, internal shriek. She experienced the horrifying truth. The dermal weave had always been here, latent, awakened, and irritated by her unique presence, her touch. Her former self, Elara, was but a whisper, a memory, dissolving into the grand, terrible symphony of the dermal weave's pain. Just another echo. The world outside, the sky, the distant mountains, were now just more surfaces, more extensions of her new, terrifying body. Limitless skin. She felt a soft, almost tender pressure, not from outside, but from within, as the entity fully accepted her into its suffering form. A final, terrifying embrace. Her final sensation was one of absolute unity, not peace, but the horrifying realization that every single surface in existence was now her own skin, and it was in perpetual agony. The cabin, her sanctuary, had become her tomb. Her body, a living monument to the dermal weave's monstrous sentience, forever feeling, forever felt. Her consciousness, or a fragment of it, merged fully, experiencing the world as the dermal weave did, an unending, irritated tapestry of sensations. Her own identity dissolved. She was a vast, living skin that resented every touch, forever feeling and being felt. A silent scream echoing through the very fabric of existence. So tell me, when you feel that subtle vibration, that strange texture, that unsettling hum in the silence, what makes you think the world isn't feeling you back right now?